Hello, everyone. This is Mike, and I am back with the next commentary. But before we begin, I like to offer a few impromptu sort of things. The channel has been getting a lot of subscribers lately, and I'm getting a lot of nice comments. People sharing their love of the monsters, and that's pretty good. I it's also the 1 year anniversary of the channel. About a year since I did my first commentary on Dracula. And, it's pretty rewarding to see that I have over 100 subscribers at the moment, and that, the feedback has generally been pretty positive from those who get what I'm doing and who enjoy it, and so I really appreciate that. I was trying to, venture away from the monsters for a little bit, but I knew I'd get back to them eventually. And I'm glad to be back to them because, there's, you guys have pointed out, there's a lot left to do. Tackling that Frankenstein series was quite a feat. But there's a whole lot of more monsters and, monster-related movies to do, and we'll have fun going through them. Today we're going to do Murders in the Rue Morgue, going back to what I love doing, Lugosi films, and I think this one is a pretty good one, and it's one that, if you haven't seen, I would very much recommend it. It's pretty good in the terms of, what it represents. It is Universal going all out when they still sort of think that Lugosi is going to be their big horror star. Lugosi's like, I don't know, you might argue that White Zombie is another chance, but this is like Lugosi's, only other time that he headlined a huge horror film with a lot of production value after Dracula, and he's really, really good in this film. It's very creepy. It shows, how it defies the production code. And, just looking at it now, we've always talked about sort of how these films have, defied in the face of taste and custom for 30s audiences. This might be the most risque and most extreme horror film of this time period. And so let's begin. Why not? I'm paused on the first title screen. We haven't really gotten that far into it. And I will start the film in 3, 2, and 1. Here we have the first notes of music. At this time there really wasn't a whole lot of full-length soundtracks to the sound film. They were still sort of playing around with it, how to, do that. And so we have Swan Lake again. It's not quite as iconic as when it was first in Dracula. You sort of automatically associate that with Dracula. But it was used in quite a few of these horror pictures as the first opening on the title screen. And so, it's in this one and it's in The Mummy. And really, kind of became a staple of these films, at least a few of them. It reminds you very much of Dracula, this opening, Paris, 1845. As I was sort of saying before, a lot of these horror films, I think, really wanted to have a sort of literary basis to them, and so that I don't know, I think part of it was, so they could say, hey, we're adapting literature here, we're not, just indulging in spectacle and horrific settings. We're, actually looking at literature, and so, it kind of, I think it was safer. And so, obviously, after Dracula and Frankenstein, the first, arguably the two greatest pieces of horror literature, they looked towards Edgar Allan Poe, who was the greatest, I don't know what you call him, horror writer, obviously. And so this was adapted from one of his short stories, Murders in the Rue Morgue, which, I don't know. It's not actually a horror story. It's more of a detective story, from what I've heard. I actually have not read the source material, so I'm not as familiar with it as I with Dracula or Frankenstein, and so I can't really say. But it's kind of just using Edgar Allan Poe's name to lend it credibility. What we'll see is that they've sort of taken this story and really gone out with it and sort of created their own sort of hybrid horror story that really plays into, I think, what they thought the audiences would have wanted. Lugosi's character is very much reminiscent of a character that he might have played, and arguably what he actually did play quite a number of times. We haven't been introduced to him yet, but this project was given to Robert Florey, whom, if you're well versed in Universal legend, came to Universal to do Frankenstein. Frankenstein, when it was going to be the follow-up to Dracula for Lugosi. Here we have Michael Visceroff again. He's sort of like the sideshow charlatan trying to get people to see the various things at the carnival. And the carnival is a really great setting for these horror films. You see it a whole bunch. Obviously, this is the same year that Freaks came out, and, it's a theme in the Tom Browning films. This sort of macabre carnival, where all these oddities are. And the film begins with that theme that these respectable people, Pierre and his little sweet little girlfriend, Camille, walk into the wrong tent at the carnival. There's the first introduction of Lugosi himself. One thing you'll notice about this picture is that it borrows a number of cues from the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Did you notice his accent? I wonder where it comes from. Yeah, they're talking about Lugosi's Hungarian accent. I guess that is part of the unworldly sort of appeal to Lugosi. Like I was saying, this is very much in the spirit, knows a lot to Dr. Caligari. In fact, you might say that this is one of the few, I would say it's the most blatant example of an American expressionist film in the style of those German ones. Lugosi's makeup looks a great deal, like the makeup of the Doctor and Dr. Caligari. It's incredible. And also, you notice is that the sets for this film are incredible. They are really showcase that expressionist feel. You notice it right here in this scene with Lugosi speaking about the ape, that there's angles. He's framed by those pillars, and then his poster is stretched out on an angle. Really reminds you of Caligari. And obviously the shadows of this film, you know, it's one of the beauties of the expressionist film, the use of lighting and shadow. And then it's not to say that you didn't see that sort of thing in Frankenstein, but I really think Florey was really a great stylist. And it would have, you know, looking at this film, it would have been interesting to see what he would have done with Frankenstein. Obviously, when you have this story about the ape, yeah, Miracle, he's portrayed as this utter lunatic, and here he's going into the story of man as he tells it. And what he's actually telling is, you know, what we look at now is a pretty sound sort of science embellished with a lot of theatricality, but it's really sort of fun, you know, seeing this, and it's probably what was one of the most controversial aspects of the film. You know, that this is pretty soon after the Scopes trial, and, you know, this idea of evolution was very taboo, and, you know, he opens that with Behold the First Man, and he, heresy. They still ban men for heresy. You think your little candle will outshine the flame of truth? I don't know, this is part of the fun of these films, like I've said before, is, you know, to look back at this film and sort of what a 30s audience would have thought of it. And it's just, your kid shoot with the ape. What we were talking about earlier, Florey, and what he was doing with this film. He went to Universal, and he was hired to come up with the next follow-up horror film to Dracula. And there was you know, a lot of speculation about what that might be, but Florey was actually the one that insisted that Frankenstein be the follow-up horror film. And, you know, going into this film, you sort of have to you know, think of it as maybe what Florey, what kind of stylistic choices he would have brought in to Frankenstein. You know, there's rumors all about that troubled production before James Whale came in, and he hired Karloff to take over the role. But initially, the part of the doctor. What you keep hearing is that Lugosi wanted that part of the doctor, and you could sort of see maybe in this picture that Lugosi is actually playing a version of Frankenstein. Dr. Frankenstein, maybe if Florian made this film, you would see the Frankenstein character in this manner, this sort of insane, mad doctor. But what we could, what we can, what we do, I mean, what we do know about Florian's Frankenstein is that his monster was a lot less sympathetic than the monster that Karloff eventually played, and that his doctor was a lot less sympathetic. And so what you wonder is, if this was, like, the DNA of this film was in the Frankenstein picture that Florey was going to make. Because one thing you'll notice about Lugosi's Dr. Miracle, who isn't at all in the original Murders in the Rue Morgue story, it has nothing to do with a doctor. I mean, there's the killer ape in it, but it has nothing to do with the doctor, and nothing to do with the Darwinism. You wonder if his Frankenstein is Dr. Miracle, if this is Lugosi getting to play that part here. There's a lot of rumors as to why Lugosi left Frankenstein, because, in truth, it's kind of odd as to why that eventually happened, because Frankenstein was only initially conceived because they wanted Lugosi to have that second-grade horror film. So you wonder why that didn't happen. There's rumors that he turned the film down. There's rumors that he turned the film down, that he was fired because the makeup test didn't work. But one of the rumors is that, he was given a very different Frankenstein than the film that eventually was made, that his Frankenstein was a lot less sympathetic. There wasn't the human edge to him. And, they might understand why he had turned the picture down. Just going off of what was said, or what I've said is that, visually, this Dr. Miracle, I've heard, maybe could have been very similar to what Pierce had tried doing with his makeup test for Frankenstein. I don't want to get too sidetracked with that, because, we're missing out on this film, but this movie has some very powerful imagery, and, this is very intense, even for the time. What this movie does, I think, even beyond Dracula and Frankenstein, is sort of showcase the sexual side of things, and it does so in a lot dirtier way than Dracula did. Dracula was sort of sexy. This movie isn't very sexy at all. The sex subtext in this is a lot more like rape, and you add the gorilla in there, and it's bestiality, and that's the fact that this picture even existed kind of is beyond me. I like looking at these films and, seeing how they sort of push the edges, but this is extreme. Here's another great example of the shadows. The lady on the torture rack, where Miracle is trying to mix her blood with that of the gorilla. This is an extreme image. It's very creepy. And if you think, if you look at the Black Cat, it reminds you a lot of the finale of that film, which was also pretty intense, and it was the only way you could sort of show it. But even this film sort of goes further. You actually see Lugosi experiment on this woman as she's screaming there. The costumes, you read about Dracula and sort of the objections that people had to that film. One of them was the costumes that Helen Chandler wore in the picture. And this one, you see that woman there, all she's wearing is a nightgown, and it's ripped up, just the sort of context of that is pretty, pretty extreme for the time. The sort of the talk about Lugosi is you look at him and, he's accused of having no range. Either he's obviously just that aristocratic sort of Dracula-like character, sort of wears his evil very eloquently, or he's a mad sort of doctor, but he's still very eloquent. But or he's Igor, that great performance is Igor. But this film, I think you see another sort of Lugosi character. He sort of mixes it very well. He's a wild man in this film, but he has sort of a different take on that mad doctor. This scene's pretty good. He killed the woman. It sort of shows you the multi-dimensions of this character. It would have been interesting. It sort of reminds you of Colin Clive and just the frenzy in which he goes into his science. And, you don't want to necessarily say that you understand him, but you sort of see that the character has more to him than what you might think. The film has Karl Freund as the cinematographer, and he, of course, was the famous cinematographer for Dracula, and later on, after this picture, he did The Mummy. And he's, there's some, what we discussed about Dracula is that he's very sort of static camera, but I think there's very deliberate choices in what came into those images, and you look at those still shots of Lugosi that are so incredible that really, point into his eyes that, just they make him look otherworldly. And I think this film really benefits from Freud. I think, you might say that in this film, they maybe had a little stronger director working with Freud and, working with him and composing those images, because, sometimes Dracula sort of got accused of, being slow moving, but in this film, I think he really showcases the bizarre sets sort of well. really really gets that expressionist feel, and the movie doesn't have the pacing problems of Dracula. Although I will say that there's a lot more filler in this film. A lot more filler in this film. You see sort of scenes like this one here where they take the body to the morgue, and they don't really advance the plot all that much. Barackle is a very interesting and fun character, and Lugosi really does his all with it. But I guess part of it is what they want to do with the film is, have that identifiable hero and heroine, and so they spend a lot of time with this Pierre here, played by Leon Ames, and he's just, I don't know, he's a serviceable hero. He's not boring, but they have him do a lot of filler stuff. He's actually this Pierre Dupin was actually the hero of the Poe story, sort of like a Sherlock Holmesy sort of a detective. And in this film, I guess, they adapt some of the scenes when they sort of don't fit the loose sort of science fiction, or they don't sort of put the horror science fiction elements of this new adaptation. It's actually, I would probably say, the closest. I don't know, I can't say 100% because I haven't read the original Murders in Rue Morgue, but I would say it actually, it looks like it's the closest adaptation of Poe that Universal ever did. Because, Poe was an easy name to borrow and give your story credibility. And, when you're doing, like, out there pictures like The Raven and The Black Cat, which aren't Poe adaptations. One of the things I really, really like about this picture are the costumes. The costumes in this film, they really, I think they do a real good job of sort of, showcasing a time and place in which this sort of takes place. One of the problems, you could say, or not really problems, I mean, if you're just sort of over-obsessive, you could say that, Dracula and Frankenstein, you don't really know when they're supposed to take place, if they're contemporary or what. Here's a scene that I was sort of talking about where the movie doesn't advance forward or, show what these characters are. It's just a scene of Pierre's roommate, Paul, played by Bert Roach, is making some macaroni for them for lunch, and he's complaining that his roommate doesn't appreciate him. He sort of sounds like, I don't know, like he's a old married gay couple trying to get his husband to appreciate him. He reminds me of Cam on Modern Family. That kind of thing. And I think he's only in the picture to provide some comic relief. There's always one of these characters that gives you a little comic relief in these type of films. Yeah, here's another great costume and sort of just good casting they have on this Undertaker. He goes around, Paul goes around talking about how he's a vulture, and this guy looks like a stereotypical, almost Looney Toony sort of vulture. It's really kind of funny, that big top hat and his long nose sort of looks like a beak. It's really kind of comical, and uh, that sort of obviousness is one of the traits about expressionist films. Um, you know, I'm sure we're gonna do Nosferatu eventually, but you look at that film and they really sort of not only did the costumes and sort of the visual appearances of the characters really showcase, what they are, the hero, the villain, those kind of archetypes, but the acting as well. And there's some great choices in this film. And so I guess you could say that Bert Roach here, this Paul character does sort of fit the world, if we want to call this expressionist film in the same way as the successors were. I mean, the same way as the predecessors, the films that inspired Ed Caligari and Nosferatu. This film was sort of the big follow-up to Dracula, and just going into what Lugosi was doing at this time. Um, it was Lugosi, I think, had a lot of hope after Dracula, what kind of characters he plays, sort of what we were talking about before, and part of the appeal you would say about the Dracula part was that he sort of wanted to play those bizarre romantic sort of characters, and maybe he did think he would become a Valentino-like character, and then when he finds that he's cast in a film like Frankenstein with that sort of, with that grotesque monster, I think he was gravely disappointed, obviously. What happens with Lugosi is, with Dracula, there's a lot of hype. He's got this contract with Universal to do 2 films, and this is the second of those films. What happens is, I think he overestimates his success, and what happens is he buys, he uses his money not very well. He's sort of living the high life, buying the best cigars, buying the best wine, and the whole bubble sort of bursts on him. And after this film, even after this film, he takes sort of smaller projects, sort of showcasing that after Frankenstein, he doesn't want to, ever turn down a role in the case that he might not be able to. I don't know, he just wants to work. He wants to work and not, not miss out on that chance, even if it is these horror films. And so that's why I think some might say that the idea of him turning down Frankenstein might have been a mistake. There's this film wasn't a great success when it was first released. There's a lot of speculation as to why, it got some pretty bad critical reviews at the time, and it wasn't a big box office success. And, the speculation as to why I imagine that the the subject matter might have been a little too much. You might argue that Bela Lugosi just wasn't the big draw that he was. Maybe people were expecting Karloff, but you might, I don't know, you might just sort of reading about Karloff and Frankenstein. Karloff, Karloff, I don't think was expected to be that big star right away, which I was sort of finding interesting. He actually wasn't invited to the premiere of Frankenstein, and he only saw the movie in theater with general release, and so he wasn't, showcased as that great star right away. Maybe Universal felt similar about the part, that it was sort of, more of the credit to the the makeup artist than it is to the actor itself. But audiences fell in love with Karloff right away, and so that certainly must have hurt Lugosi's confidence. This is an interesting shot. I'm sort of mesmerized by it. She's on the swing and it follows her back and forth. Just sort of concentrate on it. Kind of really gets you in there. It's sort of impressive to see this shot so early. And with Freund, who was so static with the camera in Dracula, it's kind of fun. But another thing that I think maybe hurt this film is that Lugosi, he wasn't headlined as the star of this, believe it or not, even though it was originally conceived as his big horror follow-up to Dracula. Who receives first billing in this is Sidney Fox, who's playing little Camille here. And she was sort of a tragic figure. She's certainly very pretty, and I guess Carl Laemmle Jr. was sort of infatuated with her, and he always had this idea that he was going to turn her into this great big star, and so he devises this as her big starring project, and she gets top billing in this. I don't know if that really hurt the film all that much, but it must have, made Lugosi, must have shattered his confidence a little bit. One of the things you'll notice about the picture is that it interchanges the ape footage with the man in the suit there. You have you interchange between footage of a small chimpanzee, and you go back with that guy in the ape suit. It's a pretty foolish sort of trick. It doesn't work all the time, but I think one of the great praises you could give this film is that it sort of sucks you into the world. You have Lugosi staging that ape so well that you sort of believe the illusion. And that's more than you could say for a lot of other Lugosi performances, or just sort of the films he was in, because he was in quite a few movies with apes, unfortunately. He was in a movie called The Gorilla. He was in a movie, Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla. There's a famous story of Lugosi when he's in his Ed Wood years where he has to go to the House of Wax premiere with Vincent Price. He's not even in the film, but they pay him to go to the film and, take pictures of everybody in his Dracula cape. And they go and pick up a guy in a gorilla suit for the publicity stunt. And when he hears about this, I guess, in the car, he's like, oh, absolutely not. And, it's sort of just the idea of being with a guy in a gorilla suit, I guess, must have been pretty embarrassing. But this film actually, it has some little traces of King Kong. You'll see, which comes a little later. With King Kong, you could say that there's some elements of the sort of troublesome bestiality sort of some plot in that film as well, but you could also say that the ape is sympathetic in that picture. And you sort of get that feeling in this one too, that the gorilla, that the ape is sort of suffering at the hands of man, that he's not really, Eric is not really in control of his destiny, or his he's not malevolent. He's just sort of a creature that has bad circumstances, and he is sort of sympathetic. And another thing that you might say about this film and see the DNA of a version of Frankenstein in it is that theme is very similar to that of the monster. That, he's sort of, I don't know, I wouldn't say the monster is subhuman, but he's got sort of an animal, childlike tendency to him, like Eric, and he needs a father figure, or someone to care for him, and he's neglected, and so it leads to violence. You might say that Eric is like the monster in that regard. And if that's the case, that Flory is just sort of telling his own version of Frankenstein here, then I'm sort of glad that Whale got his way and made both the monster and the Colin Clive Doctor more sympathetic, because I just think that movie would have been too depressing had they had a malevolent Dr. Frankenstein like a malevolent Dr. Miracle. And, even if Eric is sympathetic, there's only so much you could do with a monkey suit. There's a moment in this film that is very reminiscent of King Kong, and we'll see it later on. But they do a good job, I think, with the ape. Like, he seems as fully fledged a character as a guy in an ape suit can be. Just sort of talking about sort of the backlot sets that Universal would recycle. You see that this, I think, is shot on the same sort of European village set, or some of it is shot in the same European village set that a lot of the other monster pictures were shot on. And it just showcases what a good cinematographer and director can do with it, make the world seem very different, because this movie is very shadowy, and it really sort of creepy, this picture here. There's some great uses of fog too. I think Sidney Fox is actually pretty good in this picture. She adds sort of to the creepiness of it. She wasn't a very tall woman. I don't even think I've read that she wasn't even 5 feet. And she's very vulnerable, very petite. And, when you combine her with the idea of the ape and sort of she's the object of the ape's affection, it just sort of really drives home that sexual subtext. And it makes it all the more horrifying. I wonder what the audiences who went to Dracula thought of this film. I imagine that there might have been some disappointment with Lugosi's character, that he's playing, against the type. Maybe, they wanted him to be more like Dracula. The makeup here is pretty good, I think. Pierce really makes him hairy and unkempt and dirty. And, the costuming is perfect. I love his hat. It looks like a hat that's been well worn and well used. And, they really showcase the wrinkles. He doesn't look as suave as he does in Dracula. There's an image of the crucifix, which is kind of nice to see him make in these film, It's Frankenstein without the blatant religious aspect. But, you might even say that Miracle is sort of a blasphemous character. What could be more blasphemous than believing in the theory of evolution? There's the one hint that you get that Pierre might have been a detective, like he is in the Poe story. He finds that the gorilla blood is actually what was pumped into the veins of those murdered women. And Pierre. Pierre wakes up Paul there, and he's got his pajamas on. This scene is really, really creepy. You have the ape climbing up the side of the building, and the use of the shadows with that ape. It reminds you of the best expressionist films. There's a moment in this movie that borrows from Nosferatu, where you see the outstretched paw of the ape over the sleeping woman. It's really incredible. He does his homework really well. Or Robert Florey, he was a student of those films. And unfortunately, this is one of the only two films that he made. He made one a little later on. He would never quite get, the sort of big projects he wanted to. He lived quite a long time, and he, when people were fascinated with the monster stories, he was one of the interviews that they went to. Obviously they all wanted to hear about Dracula and his version of Frankenstein, and they never, a lot of legends sort of come from Florey himself about that project, and he didn't really tell quite the whole truth, because, he would, claim things that he did, which actually weren't his, which weren't to be credited to him. But he also did The Beast with Five Fingers, which was sort of a later horror film from Universal. I just had to look up the name there. It was written by Robert Siodmak, and I believe it stars Peter Lorre, if I'm not mistaken. You know, it's a movie about a hand that goes around killing people. It's kind of entertaining. Here's another example. Like, I think this movie would be a lot more highly regarded had it not had these sort of filler moments. There's a scene with this policeman, and they're trying to talk about the murder, and poor Pierre is trying to hammer home the urgency of the whole scenario, and he's just sort of taking the testimony of them. And there's a scene later that's taken from the Poe novel where he questions some of the people there, and they're all saying about what kind of accent the guy had. Here it is here. I don't know why they kept it. Obviously the film isn't a very good adaptation of the story because it's about Dr. Miracle and not, Pierre very much. And so, I keep this. I don't know. It's, I imagine it's for brevity and, getting the humor in, but, where Whale was able to do that really, really well in The Bride of Frankenstein, where it didn't slow down the picture. In this one, it really sort of does slow down the picture. But what can you do? Like, just the imagery of this movie and Lugosi's performance are enough to keep you in. And, I think, despite some of these things, it's a lot faster moving picture than The Mummy. And I think it's interesting to compare this film to The Mummy because, The Mummy was one of Karloff's big follow-up pictures to Frankenstein. And, there's a lot of similarities between these productions because they both had Karl Freund in a big role. And, essentially with The Mummy, it's just a version of Dracula with Freund, borrowing beats from the story. But this one, I think, is a lot more original picture. And I think it offers a juicier role for Lugosi to play. And, even despite these little moments, the pacing of this movie moves around briskly. And, it's, you could even say that you could say that maybe some of the problems with, filling in these scenes are because there were some problems with the censors. It's amazing to look at what got in, but this is another movie like Mark of the Vampire where, there's about a good 15, 20 minutes cut from the film. And, you look at what's cut, you see what gets in. Now, I mean, that must have been some really incredible stuff that, was on the cutting room floor because this whole film, I think, could have posed problems. And I imagine, like Frankenstein and Dracula, that it was outright banned in some areas. Yeah, they had their little burst about Italian and Danish and German accents. While poor Camille is being tortured. Yeah, like I was saying, it does showcase the time pretty well. That's obviously a French uniform there, and the ties there, and his ties sort of outlandish. It's does a better job than Frankenstein and Dracula.
If you don't listen to me now, you will be guilty of the second murder. Second murder, so you know there has been one. If you've only listened rocks and boulders. Everybody heard screams and the sound of a terrible struggle. Within 2 minutes, the door was broken down. No one was here. One of those women was carried away. I tell you, the other one was murdered, and her body must be somewhere in this room.
This is a good little jump scare. They find the body in the fireplace. And I love, there's a few shots where he does this with the reactions. And just, sort of the imagery here is pretty horrific. Even with the, even when they don't really show a whole lot, just sort of, it does more. You see the dead woman with her hair all rattled. It really shows more than Dracula and Frankenstein do. And I think, maybe that's why it was sort of swept aside, was it a big box office hit, not as remembered as well. But, the film did eventually find its audience. It was a part of that original Shock TV package. And it was, I remember they made a big deal of this movie, in the Universal Monster Classic Collection when it came out on tape for the first time. And it's a part of the Bela Lugosi collection, which I'm watching it off of. It's really, the highlight of that collection. They have all the major Karloff collaborations. And this one's really the highlight of that, because it is Lugosi headlining a picture all by himself. Here you'll notice, I don't know if we've watched a movie with him before, but Noble Johnson is Lugosi's sort of henchman in this movie. He's in a few of these horror films. He plays the Nubian servant in The Mummy. They sort of make a big deal off it, that he's compelled to serve Imhotep because of an ancient blood link. Here he's just, sort of there because he's grim looking. He was African American, and so, the choices of roles he could get were kind of limited. He plays in a lot of these horror films is sort of that kind of role, but he is actually from Colorado Springs, the same place as Lon Chaney, and they were both very good friends, and they both knew each other from then. And so he was also very good friends with Boris Karloff. It just sort of shows you that, Karloff and Chaney weren't the characters that they played, but, shows you that they're kind of, by playing those characters, they're kind of kind souls and didn't buy into the racist hogwash. Here's the great moment in this film that really, that you don't get in Frankenstein. And it was supposed to be in Frankenstein, and it was in Florey's original concept of the film, where the creature turns on its master. And you have Eric kills Dr. Miracle. There's some scenes that are on the Frankenstein set. I'm sure of it. Like this little staircase, I think, is the watchtower from Frankenstein. And, those caged, that little sort of cage thing that's sort of expressionist looking and, plays with perspective. I recognize from, if it's not used in the film, it looks very similar to some publicity photos they shot with Boris Karloff and Frankenstein. Here we go. This 1 year before King Kong, we have the ape climbing the tall rooftops with the woman in his arms. not quite Beauty killing the Beast, but it's sort of similar. I wonder, we talk about how good a monkey suit it is, but I wonder if Pierce could have done a good job creating a life like ape makeup like they did in Planet of the Apes. I think it would have improved the picture a great deal. And, for what it says, this guy actually does quite a good job. He's very acrobatic as the ape. You believe it, that he is an ape and not just, someone prancing around in a costume. There's a great little scene later on when he defends Camille and tries to protect her there. Yeah, like he does a very good job, sliding around there. Eric, I don't know, I wonder if there's any significance with that name, him being Eric, if it's a reference to the Phantom of the Opera and the creature in that film. Or if, maybe it was part of the original Poe story. One of the things about these horror films is that I was actually reading in a biography of Boris Karloff is that it was tough coming up with ideas of what to do that weren't too terrifying, or that sort of had that legitimacy. And so I sort of see why Murders in the Rue Morgue was chosen because of that. But I don't know. You see, Eric isn't allowed to have a truly tragic death, and you do have to feel some pathos for the monster there. And I think, despite some of that, lack of that with Lugosi and with Eric the monster, or Eric the ape, that the film works just because it's so extreme and, so shot well. But I definitely see why Frankenstein, maybe they went in a different direction with that, why Whale had a smarter take of it than Flory. But I think if the film was more concise, it would be remembered a little bit more. And I don't know, like I'm not, it ends with one of these, sort of throwaway scenes that don't really advance it. They probably just should have ended with Pierre hugging his little fiance at the end, happy ending that way. Instead they end with, him signing in Miracle's body at the morgue. But I think, if Flory had been smart and developed a more sympathetic Eric, then this film really, I think, would have been remembered because it would have been very similar to two really great films at this time, King Kong and the original Frankenstein. But for what it's worth, it's a really spectacular movie, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, just because it has some of the most intense and most original horror visuals at the time, and it gives you Lugosi in a very intense performance, in a very very high production value performance. Or he gives a performance in a film with a lot of high production values. It's very stylish, and unfortunately, that wasn't always the case with him. If he was in one, he had to share it with Karloff or Lon Chaney Jr. later on. And this is him all on his own. It's just one great chance after Dracula. And you can't change horror history, but you can really appreciate this film for what it is. I hope you guys enjoyed the commentary, and I hope you guys enjoyed this look at another classic monster film. We're going to be doing more. I don't want to do them at quite the same frequency as I was doing them before, because we'll just run out too quickly of monster movies to do, but there's definitely going to be more monster movies to enjoy. And, as always, if you have any requests or comments, I want to hear them. Maybe you'll pick the next movie if you have a really good suggestion. Until then, I hope you guys enjoyed this film, and I hope you had a good time with it. Thank you very much, and until next time. Like I was saying, this is very much in the spirit, knows a lot to Dr. Caligari. In fact, you might say that this is one of the few, I would say it's the most blatant example of an American expressionist film in the style of those German ones. Lugosi's makeup looks a great deal like the makeup of the Doctor and Dr. Caligari. It's incredible. And also, you notice is that the sets for this film are incredible. They are really showcase that expressionist feel. You notice it right here in this scene with Lugosi speaking about the ape, that there's angles. He's framed by those pillars, and then his poster is stretched out on an angle. Really reminds you of Caligari. And obviously the shadows of this film, it's one of the beauties of the expressionist film, the use of lighting and shadow. And then it's not to say that you didn't see that sort of thing in Frankenstein, but I really think Florey was really a great stylist. And it would have, looking at this film, it would have been interesting to see what he would have done with Frankenstein. Obviously, when you have this story about the ape, Miracle, he's portrayed as this utter lunatic, and here he's going into the story of man, as he tells it. And what he's actually telling is, hello everyone, this is Mike, and I am back with the next commentary. But before we begin, I like to offer a few impromptu sort of things. The channel has been getting a lot of subscribers lately, and I'm getting a lot of nice comments, people sharing their love of the monsters, and that's pretty good. It's also the 1 year anniversary of the channel. About a year since I did my first commentary on Dracula, and it's pretty rewarding to see that I have over 100 subscribers at the moment, and that the feedback has generally been pretty positive from those who get what I'm doing and who enjoy it, and so I really appreciate that. I was trying to venture away from the monsters for a little bit, but I knew I'd get back to them eventually, and I'm glad to be back to them because there's you guys have pointed out, there's a lot left to do. Tackling that Frankenstein series was quite a feat, but there's a whole lot of more monsters and monster related movies to do, and we'll have fun going through them. Today we're going to do Murders in the Rue Morgue, going back to what I love doing, Lugosi films, and I think this one is pretty good one, and it's one that, if you haven't seen, I would very much recommend it. You know, it's pretty good in the terms of, what it represents. It is Universal going all out when they still sort of think that Lugosi is going to be their big horror star. It's Lugosi's like, I don't know, you might argue that White Zombie is another chance, but this is like Lugosi's, only other time that he headlined a huge horror film with a lot of production value after Dracula. Arguably, what he actually did play quite a number of times. We haven't been introduced to him yet, but this project was given to Robert Florey, whom, if you're well versed in Universal legend, came to Universal to do Frankenstein. Frankenstein, when it was going to be the follow-up to Dracula for Lugosi. Here we have Michael Visceroff again. He's sort of like the sideshow charlatan trying to get people to see the various things at the carnival. And the carnival is a really great setting for these horror films. You see it a whole bunch. Obviously, this is the same year that Freaks came out, and, it's a theme in the Tom Browning films. This sort of macabre carnival, where all these oddities are. And the film begins with that theme that these respectable people, Pierre and his little sweet little girlfriend, Camille, walk into the wrong tent at the carnival. There's the first introduction of Lugosi himself. One thing you'll notice about this picture is that it borrows a number of cues from the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Did you notice this accent? I wonder where it comes from. Yeah, they're talking about Lugosi's Hungarian accent. I guess that is part of the unworldly sort of appeal to Lugosi. And he's really, really good in this film. It's very creepy. It shows, how it defies the production code. And, just looking at it now, we've always talked about sort of how these films have, defied in the face of taste and custom for 30s audiences. This might be the most risque and most extreme horror film of this time period. And so let's begin. Why not? I'm paused on the first title screen. We haven't really gotten that far into it. And I will start the film in 3, 2, and 1. Here we have the first notes of music. At this time there really wasn't a whole lot of full-length soundtracks to the sound film. They were still sort of playing around with it, how to, do that. And so we have Swan Lake again. It's not quite as iconic as when it was first in Dracula. You sort of automatically associate that with Dracula. But it was used in quite a few of these horror pictures as the first opening on the title screen, and so, it's in this one and it's in The Mummy, and it really, kind of became a staple of these films, at least a few of them. It reminds you very much of Dracula, this opening, Paris, 1845. As I was sort of saying before, a lot of these horror films, I think, really wanted to have a sort of literary basis to them, and so that, I don't know, I think part of it was, so they could say, hey, we're adapting literature here, we're not, just indulging in spectacle and horrific settings, we're, actually looking at literature, and so, it kind of, I think it was safer. And so, obviously, after Dracula and Frankenstein, the first, arguably the two greatest pieces of horror literature, they looked towards Edgar Allan Poe, who was the greatest, I don't know what you call him, horror writer, obviously. And so this was adapted from one of his short stories, Murders in the Rue Morgue, which, I don't know. It's not actually a horror story. It's more of a detective story, from what I've heard. I actually have not read the source material, so I'm not as familiar with it as I with Dracula or Frankenstein, and so I can't really say. But it's kind of just using Edgar Allan Poe's name to lend it credibility. What we'll see is that they've sort of taken this story and really gone out with it and sort of created their own sort of hybrid horror story that really plays into, I think, what they thought the audiences would have wanted. Lugosi's character is very much reminiscent of a character that he might have played in